Fantastic. Thank you everyone for coming. So we are going to be joined today by Kay Harrison and Richard Spencer from About Loyalty. And they have also invited Chris Keating from the National Deaf Children's Society to speak about what loyalty looks like for charities and how to raise more income. So I hope you enjoy the session. And without further ado, please feel free to kick it off.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Alex. I'll just our text setup. Can everyone see my opening slide there? Brilliant. Thumbs up. Thank you very much, Richard. Lovely. Welcome, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to Bristol Fundraising Group for having us this morning. Yes, my name is Kay. I'm the Community and Content Manager here at About Loyalty. Really excited to have Chris Keating with us as well from the National Deaf Children's Society. Chris leads the individual giving, legacies and digital marketing function. He's going to be telling us a little bit about his own experiences of growing supporter loyalty and improving the supporter experience a little bit later. And also really excited to have our director, Richard Spencer, joining us this morning to answer some of your questions a little bit later on. Today, we're going to be looking at the connection between an excellent supporter experience and increased levels of future giving. We've conducted over 10 years of research now into what makes an amazing supporter experience and how to measure it. So we're going to be sharing some of our key findings from this research. We've got some case studies and some stories for you and some evidence that you can take away, put into a business case of your own for investing in the supporter experience to grow long-term income. So by the end of this morning, you're going to be coming away with hopefully a new tool in your arsenal for measuring the supporter experience. And spoiler alert, it is called loyalty. We're going to be talking a lot about it. The research and evidence that you need to show how improving the experience has a direct impact on your long-term income by growing your supporter loyalty. And we're going to be leaving you with some practical actions, some top tips and some places to start as well for your own supporter experience journey over the next weeks, months, or maybe even later today. But before we go any further, I wanted to share some friendly faces here. This is the whole About Loyalty team. We were founded in 2018 and we're now a team of 5. So between Richard and I, you are meeting pretty much half the company this morning. We're a dedicated supporter experience agency. We use science to help charities deliver better experiences for their supporters. And the way we do that is with loyalty, because loyalty is how we measure the supporter experience. So we see it as a measurement as you would measure speed with miles an hour, as you'd measure weights with kilometers or weights with grams. Gosh, imperial or metric, I'm not going to get into that debate now. But our vision for the future is that all charities are measuring their supporter experience with loyalty. And this is how we talk about that. We dream that every charity values and measures the supporter experience and takes action to prove the experience, grow income and support, and have more impact in the world. So as a team, the way we do that is we split our time between insight and action. So that's our research with charity supporters, which provides us with millions of data points. We unpick that, we look at what makes our supporters tick. And action. So we run bespoke planning sessions with member workshops. We've got an event coming up in a few weeks' time, which I'll be inviting you all to a little bit later. Really looking forward to talking about that. But it's a mixture of the two, insight and action, which is how we help our charities to understand, measure their supporter experience and improve it to raise more income. Okay, so if you've been to one of our events before, you might recognize this heart. This is where we always like to start, because the supporter experience and what supporters experience from you has deeply emotional and personal value. And that's what we're going to be talking about this morning. We're going to be talking about feelings. We're going to be talking about emotions. The experience is the rope that connects a supporter with your cause. So it's the impact of how every touch point, every interaction with you makes them feel. Because people give to charity for emotional reasons. We know this. And what makes everyone give is deeply personal and individual. So when we're talking about the supporter experience, we're talking about the promise that a charity makes when somebody gives to them, whether it's they're giving money, their time, giving their voice, signing a charity petition, for example. What you're saying to somebody in that moment is, if you trust us with your time or your support, we will make a positive impact in the world on your behalf. So you're setting expectations at that point for the supporter about what the two of you are going to achieve together. And their experience from that moment, every engagement they have with you, every interaction, is kind of being measured against that promise, against those expectations. And if their experience of being part of that charity is met or it's exceeded, then fantastic. That is an excellent experience. But if it falls short of that expectation, so an example might be if they send a check to you in the post and they don't receive a thank you letter, or if they sign a petition for a campaign and then they don't hear back about that campaign, they never find out whether it was successful or not. That's a mismatch there against the promise that set the expectation and then the outcome. And that can be, it can be disappointing, it could be devastating, it can have an emotional impact. And what we've seen from our research is that emotional impact, whether negative or positive, does translate into an impact on their behaviours. So when we talk about supporter experience, we're talking about that difference. And so far, hopefully, all this feels like it's making sense, but the question we want to be asking, and we're going to be answering this morning, is about understanding how good your supporter experience is. Because if you don't know if you're exceeding, if you're meeting, or if you're falling short of those expectations, how are you supposed to know how you can respond to that accordingly? So how do you measure something that is a feeling? How do you measure that heart in the middle? And that's where our research comes in. So the way we do this is it's simple and it's quick to set up. It's a survey that we send online, and we ask charity supporters whether they agree or disagree with a series of statements, and those statements describe how they feel about a charity. So the answers to that survey then give us a measure of your experience, and we've been doing this now for over 10 years. So we've asked these questions to over 500,000 supporters, nearly 500,000. And we've asked them to over 50 different charities across the sector, looked at environmental, international aid, animal welfare, housing, all sorts of different types of charities. And alongside asking how people feel about the charity, we've also asked them about their intentions. So whether they intend to continue giving, whether they intend to increase giving, whether they intend to look at leaving a legacy gift in their will. And by asking those two things side by side, we've been able to prove the impact of those emotions and those feelings on the behavior. So that's that increased giving, repeat giving, future giving. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail a little bit later. But from asking now more than 100 different statements over the years, we've been able to drill it down, because no matter how we sliced it, we found these three core categories have come up as being the most important factors in terms of influencing that continued giving. So no matter how many different types of statement we've asked, the three statements that we're going to go into now, these three categories, are the ones that we see as being the most important factors in that supporter experience in order to improve the experience and increase that future giving. So without further ado, let's get into it. So this is down on one side at the moment, I realise, but I am going to put some speech bubbles up, so you will be able to see that properly in just a second. The ones in grey are the ones that we have tested, but the three that are in colour are the ones we're going to be focusing on this morning. So in first place, as it were, the most important driver when we're looking at how you can improve the experience is dialing into a supporter's feeling of commitment to your cause. The way we talk about commitment is we're talking about that shared aspiration for a better world. So that's the shared goal, the shared purpose, the reason why somebody has chosen to stand by your side in the first place, and whether that changes over time. And the only way you're going to find that out is by making it a part of your supporter experience, to be asking and listening and interacting with supporters, finding out why they chose to support you, and then reflecting it back to them at every moment and every touch point that you're able to do so. It's a two-way street when we're talking about commitment, because a committed relationship is one of the most important drivers when we're looking at growing supporter loyalty. So that's one of the things we'll go into a little bit more later. But just thinking now, how can you show that you're committed to this cause? It's the same cause they're committed to, and this is the one thing that the two of you are going to be fighting to, improve in this world. Second place, we're looking at satisfaction. That's treating your supporters really well, helping them feel happy, even delighted, just really, really valued and appreciated when they're interacting with you as a charity. So when we're asking supporters about satisfaction, we're asking them about whether their needs for information are being met. We're asking them whether the style and tone of what they're receiving from you is appropriate. And we're asking them if they're feeling thanked in an appropriate way. And of course, that can mean something a little bit different to everyone. And again, that's where the listening and two-way street part of this comes in. It's not just about broadcasting, it's about asking for that feedback and responding to that feedback. So whether they feel good about how they're being thanked, how they're being asked, how they're interacting with you. That will affect their satisfaction. And it could be something as simple as the phone call they have when they ring up to change their details, or the Christmas card that they receive from you once a year. It's the consistency of the experience and making sure every touch point is a moment to increase satisfaction. And thirdly, they're the sort of holy trinity of these factors. We're talking about trust. And when we talk about trust, we're not talking about pennies in a pound or sending out your annual reports, of course, very important to do, but we're talking about the feeling of trust, feeling like they can trust you to do the right thing, to show integrity, and to deliver on the outcomes that you've promised you were going to demonstrate impact. So it's a two-sided factor here, two things that you need to be thinking about, being counted on over time to demonstrate that you do the right thing, even when sometimes that right thing is hard to do. And this can be the case for someone, whether you've started a charity and you've had a few years, tens of years, or you've got a legacy of over 100 years. Having that consistency and that history is still really, really important. And it's about not just the figures, as I mentioned, it's also about that emotional narrative. So if you're collecting funds for an appeal to perhaps help somebody with combating homelessness over Christmas, are you then demonstrating the emotional effect of that support? Who have you been able to help? Who, like individually, has been affected, and what's the emotional outcome there? We're always talking here about the feelings that we're helping supporters to feel. So when we're coming together, those three things we're talking about are how we measure the experience, and we refer to these as loyalty. So those questions we're asking people, we're asking if they agree or disagree. We're allocating scores to these answers, and then we're able to have would someone be able to, thank you very much, a commitment score, a satisfaction score, a trust score, and that loyalty score. So by quantifying it like this, we're then able to match it against those intentions to give. And that's when we're able to create a measurement and benchmarking system. So we did survey people about their intentions, but we went one step further than this. Over 3 years, working with 12 of our charities, we tracked the actual giving of 50,000 supporters. In our report, the definitive case for growing supporter loyalty. And this is what this report showed. So this was asking these supporters those statements, the commitment, satisfaction, and trust statements, and then tracking the giving of those supporters after they'd answered. And what we found was that a 1-point increase in their loyalty score on average led to a 20% increase in that person's giving, and a 9% increase in that person's intention to leave a gift in their will. And this was over those 3 years. So from the point they were surveyed, 3 years later, this was the trajectory that we saw on average for those 50,000 supporters. And the way that we sum this up is shortly, as loyalty increases, so does your audience's long-term financial value. And that's the theory there. An excellent experience fosters a committed relationship. It meets and exceeds their satisfaction, and it inspires that trust. And this is evidence to support what we know, which is that supporters who love you more, and they feel closer to your work, they're going to give more, they're going to give for longer. But this is the statistics that demonstrate there is a direct impact. There's a connection between the two. So we said we'd talk theory and we said we'd talk action. So let's get into some examples of what this looks like out in the real world. And then we're going to be handing over to Chris. So this is a community of charities about loyalty that we work with. They all know now how good their experience is because they've measured it. They have a loyalty score or scores. They've taken part in our loyalty survey, and they now can benchmark accurately against each other, but they can also benchmark against their own progress year on year to see where they're making improvements and there's opportunity to improve. We run monthly workshops with this community, which means everyone can come together, share ideas. What are you trying? Can I try this? I'm struggling here, this sort of thing. And it's a really nice community for people to just learn, grow, and exchange best practice. We call this the CHASE Index, which is the Charity Supporter Experience Index. So before I hand over to Chris, I'll just share some examples from our CHASE Index of how people have been putting their results into action. So firstly, we're going to look at a really relatively small increase, but that's because they've been with us for just 1 year. This is a charity who joined us last year. they found they had room to improve across the board. These are those priorities again: commitment first, then satisfaction, then trust. And they decided to focus on satisfaction. This was because not only did they run our survey, they also ran some mystery shopping activity at the same time. And those two things together said, look, you need to be looking at how satisfied your supporters are. There's room to improve here. So we were able to help them form their first ever supporter experience strategy. And our survey was the springboard for making that happen. So they started 2023 saying, okay, how can we make our supporters feel valued, appreciated, satisfied at every touch point? How can we create that consistently excellent experience? And some of the ways that they decide to do that were firstly setting up a supporter experience champions. So this is underneath their supporter experience manager. They have a number of other team members across the organization who, in addition to their role, they're also now an SX champion. And that means that they have a little bit of responsibility for improving the experience in their remit, in their directorate. So it's not just siloing the supporter experience into one place, it's distributing it across an organization. Not only this, but they also have a board comprised of team heads across the org. So it's all about getting supporter experience principles embedded across the organization. So suddenly that satisfaction metric becomes a priority for more than one team. It's across several teams at the same time. In addition to that, we've been working with them on those action planning workshops I mentioned earlier. So we ran the thanking workshop with them, looking at what makes a great thank you letter, looking at what they're doing well, looking at what we can improve. We've been running other workshops with them around trust, around commitment. And what's been really exciting to work with this charity in particular is they've taken this, for example, this thanking workshop that we ran, and they've applied it all the way across their organization. So every champion has gone, okay, how could I inspire gratitude? How could I inspire that feeling of being thanked appropriately in every interaction that I have? So imagine a supporter going onto Facebook, commenting on a post from this charity, and the response they get is as thoughtful and considered as a letter that they might receive in the post. That's the approach that this charity has taken now to every single opportunity and every touch point that a supporter has with them across their journey. And the results of that we've seen just over a year later, we've seen their satisfaction score go up, not just within our survey, but also in their mystery shopping as well. So at the moment, we're still talking relatively small increases. We are talking smaller than that 1 point increase, but we're not surprised to see that because, as a reminder, we are talking about long-term results here. So over 3 years, we are hoping that we'll see these increases. But for now, it's just about moving the dial and making those small changes. That's all well and good, but I'm sure you're hoping to see some more examples where we see that financial impact change as well. So I'm really looking forward to sharing this next slide with you. I wanted to call the impact of impact, but that's a little bit jargony. But we are looking at trust here, and in particular, demonstrating impact. So this was another charity we worked with who ran some analytics on their long-term giving. They ran the survey with us several years. What they found was that supporters with higher trust scores in their database gave up to 3 times more in the following year. This is what that looks like. On the left-hand side, you've got our questions from our survey. So these were 3 questions that were around that trust element, trust factor, trusting to deliver the outcomes you promise, being an effective charity at achieving the mission, and being counted on to use funds appropriately. And what they found was those supporters highlighted in the pink there, that's people who agreed the statements. And that's the amount that they gave the year after they were surveyed. And then the people in the grey, that represents people who disagreed. And it's the amount they gave the following year. So you can see people who disagreed, they still continued to give, but they did not continue to give as much as people who agreed with those statements. People who agreed that they could be trusted gave up to 3 times more, which for that first statement, you can see £127 more on average for somebody who agrees that you can be trusted. So that statistic is something then that supporter experience team were able to take to their senior leadership, demonstrate across the organization, like, hey, this experience is worth investing in because this is what it looks like when a supporter can point to our interactions with us, can point to their journey and say, hey, I trust this organization to deliver. There is a financial return on that. And now that's something we're working with this charity is to continue demonstrating impact across their communications. This is the last story from me, and I'm going to leave. I'm not going to steal Chris's thunder here, but essentially, I can tell you who this charity chart is because they are on this call. So this is the National Deaf Children's Society's figures on the left and on the right. We've got their loyalty scores from working with us since 2018 now. You can see there's been a gentle growth there, up from 5.4 to 5.7. And then on the right-hand side, of course, with the caveat that there will not be it's not the only connection here. There will be other things going on to influence both of these factors, but you can see there's also an upward growth in their income from donations and legacies there. And this has been a number of years of focusing on telling those commitment stories within the National Deaf Children's Society and integrating supporter experience principles across the organisation. But as I say, I'm not going to talk too much about that because I think this is my moment to hand over to Chris to go into a little bit more detail about how they've done that. So without further ado, Chris, would you like me to continue sharing slides or shall I stop sharing and you can take over?
Can you keep sharing the slides, please?
Yes,
and I
of
will
course. Great.
let you know when we need to move on. So hello, my name is Chris Keating. My job title is Chapter Lead for Market at the National Deaf Children's Society. I won't try and explain what a chapter lead is because that could be a whole nother session. We have a very innovative and exciting agile structure, but essentially I lead the individual giving, legacies and digital marketing function at NDCS. Next slide, please. Who are the National Deaf Children's Society? Just to give you an idea of who we are and what we do. We are the leading charity for deaf children in the UK, the only one of any size, really. We work with deaf children and young people. We work with their families. We work with the professionals who support them, and we influence government at local and national levels. And the sort of scale of us, in case it's a question on your mind, we have about 250 staff nationwide and an income of around 30 million at the moment. So that's just a bit of context. Next slide, please. So one of the things Kay touched on, which I think is particularly important about Loyalty's work, is it's a wonderful business case for investing in supporter experience. If any of you have wondered how much time to spend on improving supporter experience or are asking for budget to develop better relationships with donors or discussing with your band teams, for instance, about whether an extra mailing or something like that is necessary. About Loyalty have a really immense evidence base that supporter experience does matter. Now, Kay also helpfully showed the NDCS's income growth over the years, which isn't all down to having an amazing supporter experience. It's down to consistent investment in effective fundraising campaigns. But focusing on supporter experience helps that a great deal. So on this slide, we have a sort of virtuous circle that could apply to any charity. You invest in fundraising in the belief that this will mean you have more money to spend on delivering for your beneficiaries in the long term. You get good results from that. I spot the deliberate mistake. My arrow's the wrong way round. Apologies. You get good results from that. If the results are good, then that increases everyone's confidence in the fundraising team, and that fundraising is a worthwhile thing to do, which results in more investment. Then you continue to get good results, and you get an ever increasing level of confidence in fundraising. Next slide, please. How does loyalty feed into that? I mean, essentially by focusing on the quality of your fundraising and the experience of your supporters, that increases supporter loyalty. Loyalty, as you will have seen, means you have better results, and that in turn increases the level of trust internally in the fundraising you're doing, and helps you continue to make the case to spend money on fundraising and on supportive experience. So if anybody wants to know why our income goes up like that despite recessions and so on, essentially this. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to dive into our results a bit. These are the results from the most recent About Loyalty Chase Index survey. We have been there. I think we were one of the first people to take part in About Loyalty Consortium, and these are our most recent results. As you can see, commitment is a bit lower than satisfaction, which is a bit lower than trust. One of the interesting things about the About Loyalty results is that charities tend to either have commitment highest or trust highest, and it's very rare, if ever, for anybody to have satisfaction highest. And I think nobody really knows why that is. But in any case, we have higher trust and lower commitment. This was not a surprise to us. We do a fair bit of face-to-face fundraising and individual giving from an audience of people who don't hugely know much about childhood deafness. So it was not a shock to us that people trust us to do what they say. They have a good experience with us, but they are less passionately committed to the cause on the whole than one would find in some other charities. If you work with an animal charity or a medical research charity, then very likely your commitment scores are higher than your satisfaction or trust. But next slide, please. So looking at within the details of our commitment scores, so these are three of the scores three of the questions that make up commitment. You will see we don't have a 25%-ish strongly agree with the statement that they care passionately about the work of the National Deaf Children's Society, and 43% say they agree. Slightly lower on the question about, is this a relationship that they feel committed to and is important to them? With only 16% strongly agreeing with that and 40% agreeing. So that tells us something, that they are more into the cause perhaps than they are into us as a charity. Next slide, please. Satisfaction. So these are the 5 questions that make up the satisfaction score. Again, an interesting observation. More people are overall very satisfied with their experience as a supporter of the National Deaf Children's Society than they are about any specific aspect in the other questions. So relatively few people tell us that they feel we understand why they are giving, um, and a higher number say that our communications meet their needs for information about what we do. But still, overall, very satisfied. We get higher scores than any specific element of this. Um, and this has been true every year as well. Um, where do we go with that? So next slide, please. I mean, one of one of the things that I have taken from that actually is that the specific components of each of commitment and satisfaction are interesting to look at and provoke useful thoughts about what one can do. But essentially, if you move any element of commitment or satisfaction or trust, you probably improve all of them. And if you improve satisfaction, you probably also improve commitment and trust. Is sort of the picture we have. So what what have we done with this? Again, having one of the challenges one often faces as a fundraiser is you know or think you know what you need to do, what you should do, and convincing everybody else is the difficult bit. And again, this work from About Loyalty really adds the evidence to support your instincts, which is great. So what have we done to improve supporter experience? Again, aided with the work we've done with About Loyalty. We have had 3 areas of more or less continual focus across our fundraising program, particularly the individual giving program. So always focusing on the quality of supporter experience when somebody signs up as a new supporter. As I mentioned, we do a certain amount of face-to-face fundraising where it is particularly important that the quality of the conversation that somebody has when they're signing up is really, really positive, and people don't feel under any pressure to give, because that is what results in higher loyalty. That's one area of focus. A second area of focus, for us, it is the stories we tell in. I've said welcome communications. It's not just welcome communications, it's the entire supporter experience. But the welcome journey is something that we do a big review of every couple of years, to make sure it is as good as it can possibly be. Why stories? Essentially because stories are how people communicate emotion with one another. It is a mental storytelling is a mental shortcut that helps people understand what is really being said and meant. So we we did some insight work to identify which stories really resonate with our supporters. Essentially, there are 2 broad categories of story. One is about a parent or family, parents finding out that they have a deaf child, and that can be a difficult experience for them, and the supporter through us helping them understand that it's not going to be so bad, that there is lots of support on offer, and that a deaf child can achieve anything that a hearing child can. And then a kind of a second category of story about a deaf child or young person who is facing some kind of injustice as a result of their deafness and helping overcome that. Storytelling, and then, yes, auditing communications across touch points. It's remarkably easy in a medium or large size organization for things to slip through the gaps, for there to be letters or emails that have been on file for ages and somebody is still sending out, even though they are in desperate need of updating. So again, periodically we do an audit, go through, okay, what could everyone be receiving as part of their supportive experience, and is it all as sharp as it could be? Fundamentally, that's what we've been doing to improve our supportive experience, and it has evidently been working. Next slide, please. Do I even have another slide? Right, at this point, everybody loves a good video, so I thought I would share with you a lovely video story from one of our Christmas appeals, just to give you an example of the kind of stories that we tell and how we tell them. If somebody could put that on, that would be great.
Yeah, hopefully this is all going to work really, really smoothly. So I'm going to tick the box that says you can all hear my sound. Yep, great. Can we all see Henry's story?
Henry is a smiley, bubbly, happy little boy. Whenever we go out, he's brightening up people's day. When Henry was born, we were over the moon. We'd sing songs to him, we would read stories, we'd play music to get him to sleep at night. We noticed that Henry wasn't really giving anything back from that. So we had ongoing tests with Henry. We found out that there was definitely a loss. We were really shocked when they mentioned it in the hospital. I tried to compose myself, but it wasn't till I got into the car that it hit me and my partner, because it was just so unknown to us and we didn't know what to expect. We don't have anybody in the family that has any form of hearing loss, so it was all completely new to us. I constantly think about when he goes to school, will he be able to hear in a classroom, or when he's a teenager, silly things like on his wedding day, will he be able to hear his first dance? But now that I know that there is the National Deaf Children's Society, I'm not on my own, Henry's not on his own. We've got so much support out there. I went onto the website and saw that there was a local networking get-together group. So I went, there were people there from the National Deaf Children's Society to support and help. There were other children there with hearing loss and hearing aids in. So for once it was just so nice to walk into a room and feel completely normal. We don't feel at all that we're on our own anymore. Having spoken to other parents, it's really nice to know that we're kind of all in a bit of a bubble together. So with the help of the National Deaf Children's Society, we now know that anything that Henry wants to do, he will be able to achieve. And we know that nothing's going to hold him back because he's got all the support that he needs. Going forward, he will be okay, whatever happens. We kindly ask this Christmas that you donate, no matter how small, to the National Deaf Children's Society. It's a charity that holds a really special place in our heart, and we know that the charity will be with us every step of the way through Henry's journey. Thank you for sharing the joy this Christmas.
Cool. That is it from me. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing. That virtuous circle, whenever I see it, just provides like a real crystal clear example of everything we've talked about this morning. The fact that investing in that experience increases the confidence in investing in your fundraising. Just really nice to see it laid out like that, and what a lovely video as well. Thank you. Well, we're coming up to 11:15, so we're going to have time for questions towards the end. But before we do that, I do want to share with you five things you can do now, 5 places you can start to be improving your supporter experience. And as I mentioned earlier, I've got a link for that report as well to download at the end. So where might you start now? If you're coming away from this webinar, you're feeling inspired, you're feeling fired up and ready to get stuck into improving your supporter experience, where are you going to start? First off, capturing your supporter motivations, thinking about how you can listen to your supporters and discover that why, that shared purpose that we know is going to grow, that feeling of commitment. And this doesn't have to be a big project, doesn't have to be a massive focus group. It could be something as simple as picking up the phone with perhaps a medium value supporter, someone who might want to be speaking to you and giving you their time. Or it could be looking at perhaps some way on the website that you could integrate another question, for example, into your donation forms, capturing that reason at the point of donation that somebody is giving you their funds, and just thinking about different ways that you could go about capturing that motivation to grow their commitment. Secondly, we're looking at satisfaction. We're thinking about showing gratitude, and not just as a thank you letter, but as Chris mentioned there, making those magic moments consistently across all touch points. So making sure every moment that you interact with the supporter has perhaps a little sprinkle of something that says, we value you, we appreciate you, and making some of those moments, stand out, making them feel like they're really quite special and part of that bigger picture, that what you're working towards together. So helping them feel really satisfied with how they're being treated. And thirdly, there, we touched on how trust this morning is not just about statistics, thinking about the emotional impact of your work. So that video we've just seen for the National Deaf Children's Society, seeing the emotional narratives that are going on behind your story, putting faces to those statistics and showing impact in a human, authentic sort of way. Thinking about how we can grow the feeling of trust as well as the knowledge of that trust. Number 4, making supporter experience a priority. We've seen several examples this morning of how you can embed supporter experience across an organisation, thinking about how you can get it onto everybody's radar, thinking about the targets you can set, the KPIs you can find, thinking about the fact that we're all on this call because we know how important it is, but does everybody else in your team, everyone else in your organisation, how are you going to inspire and engage them to the same sort of level? So this is on everyone's radar, making it a priority project for your organisation and getting that buy-in. And hopefully that's where our report can help you out with building that business case. And lastly then, measuring the supporter experience, because when you measure something, you can change it, and it will change how you go about your work and your interacting with supporters. So of course, I am going to leave us with that final call to action there to make sure that you are finding ways that you can measure the experience, integrate it across your organisation, and building commitment, satisfaction and trust in every touch point that you have with supporters. But I have 2 more for you. The first one, that event that I did mention, we have Loyalty Day coming up on the 21st of November, which is in just a few weeks' time. So if you've enjoyed this morning, this is another afternoon, completely free. It's guest speakers, it's more insights from us. It's discussing how we know how good our supporter experience is. So do scan that QR code for a registration place, or go into the URL there to read more information. But it's promising to be a really, really interesting day. So do come along and join us for that if you're interested. And secondly there, if you're looking for more insight into that study that I mentioned, then please do visit the website to download the report here, also completely free. So we've got those 2 for you there. Okay, we're coming up to 10 to 11, so I think I'm going to hand back over to Alex and Emma at Bristol Fundraising Group, and if you have any questions. But yeah, if you do want to have any discussions about how we go about everything we talked about this morning, feel free to drop us an email or give us a call as well. I'm going to stop sharing there. There we go.
Great. Thank you so much, Kay. That was, really fascinating and really great to hear from Chris from first-hand experience of how they've grown loyalty. I can see that there is a question already. So, I'm going to open up for questions. Feel free to raise your hand. So you just press the react button. You can raise your hand there. Or if you'd like me to read out your question, just type it in the chat. Liz, are you happy to go off mute?
Thanks very much. Yeah, thank you so much for that talk. That was really useful and interesting. And I had a question about surveys. We've been considering doing some surveys recently to try and I guess, find out, about our supporters' behaviour or things that they might want, the reasons that they support us and things like that. And the worry that we often have is, if we send out a survey, isn't that quite sort of biased towards the kind of people that have the time to answer that survey. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is, how do you encourage people to actually answer the surveys that you put out? Just a bit of context, I work for the Bristol Cable, so we have a print newspaper, but we also obviously put our news online. And I think what we're worried about is that if we wanted to ask our supporters, should we do more online content or print content? We're doing an online survey. So the people who are kind of already online are quite used to, digital native, quite used to doing those online surveys, are probably much more likely to say, we like the online content, we access your content online. Whereas the people who are really dedicated to the print and just kind of get our print through the post and are maybe a bit more like physical, paper content, maybe the sort of older contingent who really love our newspaper, I guess we struggle to feel like we're getting reliable results sometimes.
Thank you.
So I pick that one up.
Yes,
yeah.
Thank you, Richard.
No, thanks, Liz. Thanks for the question, and it's a really valid question. So I mean, I think you've almost answered your own question, because there's any form of research will have a bias built in, so you can't really measure anything without affecting it. So that always exists in any kind of research that you do. So you're right to have that kind of question. I've worked at organisations who have wanted to run a survey on how the supporter magazine was. So they put a survey in the magazine, and the people whose opinion they included into the analysis was those who had read the magazine, because obviously how do you assess the magazine unless you've read it? So they only got answers from people who read the magazine. So obviously all of the feedback was, it's brilliant, it's amazing. And so the people who read it are obviously going to say that. So the key thing that we needed to change there was to actually ask people who'd never read it why they never read it. So actually thinking just differently about the research. So there are ways you can get around that bias, but you are right that any form of research will have that bias in it. So in terms of our research, we've been doing the research for a long time, and so we do. We can run the research either through online or through the post, or both. So we can actually do that multi-channel. We do SMS as well. So anywhere that we can contact somebody directly, then we can offer the survey through that point. So that's one point. We've also been, I guess, tweaking our copy, tweaking our approach, tweaking our timing, working out what gets the best kind of response rate. But there are so many variables in response rate as well. I think you will always get almost like a bathtub. So those who love you and those who dislike you most, have something to say, are passionate, more likely to respond. Maybe those who are feeling a little bit, I don't know, sort of in the middle, maybe less likely to respond. But I think what's important in terms of the way that we run the research is that we have exactly the same approach across all charities. So by doing so, we have, as much as we can, we're controlling for that bias, if you like. So every piece of research we get has the same unknown but known. It's an unknown known. So we know that there's be some bias in there. We couldn't describe exactly what it was, otherwise we'd be able to just index for it, if you like, across the results. We'd be able to wait for that then. But instead we just have that as a known control factor across all the research. So if we're measuring Bristol Cable's supporter satisfaction, yes, there may be some bias in that result, but when we're benchmarking it, when we know where it scores high or low, then we can do that with a real degree of confidence across that kind of whole suite of charities. So there will be some bias. It's always going to be the case. But I think the methodology that we stick to makes sure that we eliminate as many, control for as many of those factors as possible. So cool, thank you.
Great, thank you. I think we've got a hand up from Georgia as well, from Fairshare.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. That was really interesting. I am just, like, the results are so fascinating. I'm just really keen to know, so I'm from a much smaller organisation. Our income's just over £1 million. So I'm just really keen to know kind of what steps you might recommend where the budget for the research is a bit more limited, and kind of what the kind of key steps would be to making a start with this. I know that I have buy-in from my team and they're really keen to kind of improve the supporter experience, but yeah, just in terms of what we would be able to commit to in terms of cost is a little bit more limited. So what would be the kind of starting point, I suppose, for a smaller organisation?
Should I pick that up?
Sure. Well, I was going to also touch on those
Okay.
top tips, those places to start that we ended with, Georgia. So listening to your supporters, thinking about what it is that you could do within your team to, whether it's pick up the phone to one or two for a bit of sort of qualitative feedback, whether it's looking at your donation form and whether there's any space on that donation form to just capture a free text response as to why, to making those steps towards capturing motivations, because then that gives you the information you need to start tweaking your supporter journey, reflect those motivations back to them. That's just the first thought that came to my mind. Richard, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you've got buy-in from the organisation and the teams, I think get the report, have a look at what's in there, have a think about how commitment, satisfaction, and trust apply to your supporters. It may be that you do have sufficient volume to do some quant research, or it may be that you need to do just a bit of qualitative finding out, speaking to supporters when they contact you, as Kay was suggesting, capturing maybe other bits of information when they're responding through online or print forms. There are other ways of gathering that information. But I think if you've got if you could measure it, brilliant. But if you don't have the volumes that really make it kind of maybe worthwhile, then actually understanding what those principles are, making sure that actually you're critically appraising what you're doing against that framework and against those drivers, then that's a really, really powerful place to start.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. While we're waiting for more questions, I had a question around trust and the integrity of a charity. And do you have any recommendations for the best ways to build integrity, whether it's, say, a small charity where their brand might not be that recognized, or if it's, say, a larger charity where they may have had difficulty with, say, press or something like that, and they want to build back up the trust within their charity? Are there any kind of tips that you'd recommend to build that back with supporters?
Good question. Thinking about integrity makes me think of some of the workshops we've been running with our Chase Index members. And one of the things that comes up when we're thinking about a supporter journey, and particularly a beneficiary journey, is talking about the moments that don't feel maybe as much of a win or a peak. It's very easy to talk about the wins when we're demonstrating impact. When we're demonstrating integrity, we need to show that we're there through the lows as well as the highs. So, for example, if you're a campaigning organization, you want to shout about the wins, but you also want to say, actually, we've maybe not made it this time, but we're still going to keep trying. We're still going to stand by what's right to do. Or, for example, we've worked with a charity who work with homeless young people. It's very, very tempting to always talk about those success stories, but beneficiary journeys aren't linear, and sometimes people will leave the housing system and then come back round, and for them it could feel like a personal failure, but this charity is there with them on that journey, keeping them going. So it's being authentic about the process, and the fact that everyone here on this call, their charity is on a journey to make that impact, and that journey isn't a smooth upward trajectory, and being transparent with supporters about that's kind of the non-linear nature of that impact could be a way of demonstrating that integrity. Yeah, I think authenticity and openness when you're talking about your impact, as well as I say, the punchlines that are going to be important as well.
Great, thank you. Yeah, just wanted to see. Just had a question that's coming from Julie Cole. Do you have any thoughts about sharing genuine gratitude with supporters, and when it becomes over the top or sappy to the point of insincere? In other words, how do we share Chris might be able to help. How do we share thanks authenticity?
Shall I take this one?
Go for it.
So I would always say be sincere, and always reflect the reality of what your organization is doing, and who it's helping. But beyond that, I would not worry about looking sappy. Like some, the video I shared, an absolutely lovely story. If you have worked on that story and that video for the period of 3 months, the thought will cross your mind, oh my God, this is so schmaltzy. What are we doing? But it's really what works for the audience. It's really really well received by them, and it's that it is very much the family's own experience and their own words. So I wouldn't censor yourself. Like if you had an unusually hard-nosed group of donors, then I wouldn't apply the same approach. But otherwise, yeah, just go for it. Push the emotional buttons. Bring home the impact of what you're doing, and don't censor yourselves from doing it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. If we've got time to add to that, when we talk about thanking and showing gratitude, inspiring those feelings, we talk about reassuring the supporter that you are doing exactly what what you say you've done, demonstrate that impact. We talk about inspiring supporters in that letter, and we talk about making them feel proud as well, proud of what the two of you have achieved together. So if you're looking for perhaps a little bit of a framework, that's something that I could share with you there. But I'd absolutely echo Chris's words, which is speaking from the heart, and where possible, using the words of your beneficiaries and keeping it, again, as authentic as possible will hopefully help you find that line. But listening to supporters, again, getting that feedback and keeping your finger on the pulse, it'll be trial and error, but you'll sort of find your voice and find your style and tone.
I suppose as well, thinking about what Chris was saying, maybe take second opinions as well. I know that if I've worked on videos before and you'd be watching them and working on them for quite a long time, so it's always great to get other people in the charity to have a look as well. Shall I? Don't know if there's any more questions. If there aren't any more questions, then it's 1 minute past 11, so we'll be finishing just so over time. Thank you so much, Kay, Richard, and Chris for joining us. Yeah, taken so much away from the session. But if anyone does have any questions, please get in touch, and we'd be happy to share this across with Kay and Richard and get you both in touch with each other. And other than that, the recording for this session will go up on our YouTube channel in a couple of days' time at the most, and you'll receive a link with the next newsletter that goes out. So thank you everyone for joining, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks everyone.